What if everything you were taught about strength was wrong? What if the most dangerous person in any room isn't the loudest, the most aggressive, or the most visibly confident, but the one who deliberately makes you believe they are none of those things? Pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because this is not a motivational video, this is not a pep talk. This is something far more unsettling, far more ancient, and far more true than anything the modern world has been willing to admit. This is a revelation, and revelations, by their very nature, disturb before they liberate. Think about the last time you tried to impress someone, a boss, a rival, a room full of strangers. Think about the energy you poured into signaling your power, your knowledge, your status, your capability. You straightened your posture. You spoke with volume. You made sure they knew exactly who you were and what you were capable of. And what happened? They either ignored you, competed with you, or felt threatened by you. Not one of those outcomes served you. Now think about a different kind of person you've encountered, perhaps only once or twice in your life, because they are rare. Someone who said very little, someone who didn't seem to be trying, someone who appeared on the surface unremarkable, maybe even slightly beneath you. And yet, something about them stayed with you. Something about them made you uneasy in a way you couldn't name. Something about them days later still occupied space in your mind. That person wasn't weak. That person was operating at a level you weren't even aware existed. The modern world has sold you a lie, and it has sold it to you so consistently through so many channels that you have mistaken it for instinct. The lie is this: that power must be visible to be real. That strength must be demonstrated to be effective. That intelligence must be announced to be respected. This is the lie of the amateur. And Machiavelli, the man who advised princes, who studied the mechanics of power with the cold precision of a surgeon, knew better. He always knew better. Niccolò Machiavelli lived in a world where showing your true strength too early was not a tactical error, it was a death sentence. In Renaissance Florence, the political landscape was a battlefield of invisible wars. Alliances formed and shattered overnight. Men of great ability destroyed not because they lacked power, but because they made the fatal mistake of showing it too soon, too loudly, too clearly. Machiavelli watched these men fall. He studied their collapse with the detached eye of a philosopher who has separated himself from sentiment. And what he understood, what he encoded in his writings, often in language that confused moral critics for centuries, was a truth so counterintuitive that most people even today are not ready for it. The most powerful move is to appear powerless. But why? Why would someone with genuine ability, genuine intelligence, genuine strength choose to conceal it? Doesn't that feel like self-betrayal? Doesn't that feel like weakness itself? No. And the fact that your instinct recoils from this idea is precisely why you need to hear it. The moment you display your full capability, you change the game. You make yourself a target. You trigger envy in those beneath you, defensiveness in those beside you, and the calculating instincts of those above you. You force every person in your environment to recalibrate their relationship to you, and almost none of those recalibrations will benefit you. But when you appear weak, when you appear limited, when you appear as something less than you are, you become invisible. And invisibility, as Machiavelli understood, is the supreme tactical position. The hunter does not announce his presence. The predator does not wear its teeth exposed as it approaches its prey. The spider does not decorate its web with warnings. The trap that works is the trap that cannot be identified as a trap. This is not deception in the ordinary sense. This is strategy at its most refined. The art of controlling perception while the world believes it is controlling you. And here is what makes this particularly devastating to understand. The people who practice this are not hiding out of fear. They are not concealing their strength because they doubt it. They are concealing it because they understand something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. People are most comfortable with those they believe they can predict. People are most generous with those they don't feel threatened by. People reveal the most to those they underestimate. When you appear weak, you are not losing ground. You are collecting intelligence. You are watching the environment without being watched. You are allowing others to overextend, to reveal their cards, to exhaust their aggression on a target they believe is beneath them. while you remain untouched, intact, and perfectly positioned. Machiavelli wrote, "The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves." But here is what that passage conceals within its architecture. The highest practitioner is not the lion and not the fox. The highest practitioner is the one who can be mistaken for neither, and for that reason encounters no traps and no wolves at all. You were taught to be the lion. Society rewards visible roaring. Schools grade performance, workplaces celebrate those who speak loudest in meetings. Social media has made self-display into a survival mechanism. The culture around you has constructed an entire architecture of rewards for those who make their capabilities visible, loud, and undeniable. And in doing so, it has created a world full of people who are extraordinarily easy to read. Easy to read means easy to manipulate. Easy to manipulate means permanently vulnerable. But there is another kind of person, the kind that this video will begin to construct in you, if you are ready. And I want to be clear about something. Not everyone is ready. Some people will hear what I am saying and feel immediate resistance. That resistance is not moral. It is not integrity. It is simply the ego refusing to surrender a narrative about itself that it has carried for too long. If you are ready, you will feel something else. Not excitement. Excitement is superficial. You will feel recognition. You will feel the particular cold clarity of someone who has always sensed that the game being played around them was not the game being shown to them. That feeling is the beginning. The concept at the center of this video is what I will call strategic diminishment. It is the deliberate, calculated, and disciplined practice of presenting yourself as less than you are. Not from insecurity, not from fear, but from a sophisticated understanding of how power actually moves through human systems. Strategic diminishment is not passivity. It is not self-erasure. It is not chronic humility or false modesty. It is something far more precise and far more demanding than any of those things. It is the controlled management of your own image, the deliberate calibration of what others believe about your capabilities, your intentions, and your position, in service of outcomes you have already decided in silence that you will achieve. Machiavelli understood this as the foundation of true political survival. He did not write about it explicitly in a single passage, because to do so would have made the knowledge too available, too simple, too easily weaponized against itself. Instead, it runs as a current beneath almost everything he wrote. It is the architecture beneath the architecture, and it applies with devastating precision to your life. Right now, in the world you inhabit today. Because think about where you are. Think about the environment you move through every single day. You have colleagues who are threatened by your ability. You have people in your social circle who have positioned themselves relative to an image of you that you never consciously chose to project. You have rivals who are watching for the moment of weakness that will allow them to move. You have superiors who feel more comfortable with those they believe they can control. Every one of these relationships is a negotiation. And in every negotiation, the party who shows their hand first loses. You have been showing your hand, not because you are naive, not because you are careless, because no one ever taught you that there was another way, because the cultural script you inherited told you that authenticity means transparency, that confidence means visibility, that intelligence means demonstration. Those scripts were written for a world that does not reward what they claim to reward. The world rewards outcomes, and outcomes are produced not by those who display the most, but by those who understand the most, including understanding exactly what they should never display. Machiavelli watched princes fail. He watched brilliant men, men of genuine vision and capability, destroyed by the very display of their genius. He understood that a court, and every organization, every social group, every family dynamic is a court, is not a meritocracy. It is an ecosystem, and ecosystems do not reward raw ability. They reward the ability to navigate the ecosystem. The most important survival skill is not the most visible one. And here is where I want to push you. Not gently, but with the precise pressure of someone who has looked at this long enough to understand what it costs you to keep doing what you're doing. Every time you over-explain yourself, you are leaking power. Every time you correct someone who is wrong in a way that makes your superiority obvious, you are creating an enemy. Every time you demonstrate the full range of your capabilities in an environment that was not designed to reward them, you are handing ammunition to people who will use it against you. Every time you let your frustration show when you are underestimated, you are confirming to your observers that their strategy is working. You are doing all of this right now, in your actual life, and you are not getting what you deserve from it. What Machiavelli offers you is not a moral framework. It is not comfort. It is a map of the terrain as it actually exists, not as you wish it existed. And the first landmark on that map is this. The appearance of weakness is not a retreat. It is an advance in a direction the enemy cannot see. Stay with this, because what comes next will show you not just why this is true, but how it works, in the specific details of the life you are living right now, in the conversations you are having, in the rooms you are entering, in the relationships you are navigating. If you have understood even a fraction of what I have said so far, something has already shifted in you, the beginning of a new way of seeing. The predator doesn't announce its hunger. The strategist doesn't announce their move. The truly intelligent don't announce their intelligence. They let you believe what you need to believe, and then they act. Continue watching, because what I am about to show you will not just explain this concept. It will change the way you walk into every room for the rest of your life. And some of you, the ones this was always meant for, already know exactly what I mean. You are still here. That already tells me something about you. Most people would have clicked away by now, looking for something easier, something that flatters them, something that gives them the warm sensation of growth, without demanding the cold discipline of real change. But you stayed, and staying, in a world designed for distraction, is itself a form of power. Now let's go deeper. Because the surface of this concept, appear weak, gain advantage, is only the entry point. What lies beneath it is a complete architecture of human interaction, one that Machiavelli understood with a precision that still unsettles those who encounter it for the first time. Let's begin with the fundamental mechanism. Why does appearing weak actually work? The answer is rooted not in strategy but in biology, in the deepest architecture of the human nervous system. When humans perceive a threat, they mobilize. The threat doesn't have to be physical. It can be a social threat, a status threat, a reputational threat. The moment another person is identified as capable, superior, or dangerous, the observer's entire system orients toward defense, toward counter-strategy, toward the management of this perceived danger. This is automatic. It happens before conscious thought, and it happens in every environment: the boardroom, the dinner party, the first date, the family gathering, the negotiation table. The moment you are perceived as powerful, you have activated every defense mechanism in every person around you. You have turned the room into an immune system, and you are the foreign body it is now mobilizing to reject. This is why raw visible power is so often self-defeating, but the moment you are perceived as limited, as harmless, as beneath the level of serious competition, those defense systems relax. The environment opens. People speak more freely. They reveal more. They lower their guard because they see no reason to maintain it. They compete less viciously because they do not see you as a real contender. And while all of this is happening, you are watching everything. Machiavelli described this dynamic with the phrase often paraphrased as, "Never show your hand before the moment is right." But the more profound version of this insight is that you don't just conceal your hand, you actively show a different hand. Not an empty hand, a deliberately misleading one. This is not simply hiding, this is active construction of a false image, maintained with discipline and executed with precision. Now let us identify the 5 core traits of the person who practices strategic diminishment at its highest level. These are not abstract qualities. These are observable, learnable, and, if you are disciplined enough, implementable. The first trait, controlled silence. The weak speak when nervous. The average speak when they want to impress. The strategically intelligent speak when speech advances a specific objective and are silent in every other moment. Think about how most people respond to silence in a social or professional context. They fill it. The discomfort of an empty conversational space is so acute for most people that they will say almost anything to eliminate it. And in that anything, in that nervous, compulsive filler, they reveal almost everything. Their insecurities, their priorities, their fears, their alliances, their ambitions. The practitioner of strategic diminishment does not fill silence. They inhabit it. They allow it to expand until the other person, unable to bear it, pours their interior landscape into the space between you. This is not rudeness. This is not coldness, though it may be mistaken for both. It is the disciplined management of conversational space as a resource, one that the strategist uses and the amateur wastes. Machiavelli understood that the prince who speaks too readily signs his own vulnerabilities into the air for all to hear. The prince who speaks only when he has already determined the effect of his words holds a position of extraordinary advantage over everyone who mistakes that restraint for limitation. When you speak less, people interpret your silence as depth. They project onto you the qualities they fear they might be missing in themselves. Your quietude becomes a mirror, and mirrors are profoundly unsettling to the ego. The second trait, strategic incompetence. This one will disturb you, and that disturbance is the signal that you need to understand it more deeply. Strategic incompetence is the deliberate, calibrated performance of limitation in areas where your true capability would make you a target, a threat, or a competitor to someone whose goodwill you need. In a team environment, the person who is always the most visibly capable is also the person who is always given the most work, always held responsible when things go wrong, and always resented by those who feel diminished by comparison. The practitioner of strategic diminishment identifies which of their capabilities serve them when displayed, and which serve them better when concealed. They then perform, with remarkable subtlety, a version of themselves that is adequate but not threatening, present but not dominating, capable but not superior. This is not mediocrity. The results they produce tell a different story. But the process by which they produce those results, the ease with which they navigate problems that others find difficult, the speed at which they move when no one is watching, all of this is kept carefully out of sight. What others see is the outcome, never the mechanism. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the prince who governs not by appearing to govern, but by creating the conditions in which governance happens naturally, invisibly, without the friction of visible authority. The same principle applies to any sphere of human power. You do not need to be seen winning. You need to win. Those are not the same thing, and conflating them has been the downfall of genuinely capable people throughout history. The third trait, radical patience. The strategically intelligent understand time in a fundamentally different way than the reactive majority. Most people operate on the emotional timeline. They respond when triggered, act when frustrated, advance when the emotion of ambition demands release. This makes them extraordinarily predictable. You can map their moves not by logic, but by simply tracking what agitates them. The practitioner of strategic diminishment decouples action from emotion. They may feel the trigger, the insult, the provocation, the injustice, the opportunity, but they do not allow feeling to determine timing. Timing is determined by strategic calculation. Not when does this feel right, but when does this produce the intended effect? This radical patience is perhaps the most difficult of all 5 traits, because it requires the practitioner to absorb discomfort, to tolerate underestimation, to absorb dismissal, to sit inside injustice, without reacting, without signaling, without giving anything away. The reed that bends in the storm survives. The oak that stands rigid against it fractures. Machiavelli observed that princes who moved too soon, who acted on the energy of their capability before the conditions were precisely right, almost always overextended and fell, while those who waited, who endured, who appeared passive until the moment ripened, these were the ones who ultimately transformed their position. Patience is not inaction. Patience is action deferred until the optimal moment. And knowing the difference between deferment and avoidance is the skill that separates the strategist from the coward. The fourth trait, the mastery of understatement. In a world that communicates through hyperbole, where everything is amazing, critical, unprecedented, essential, The person who speaks with consistent understatement creates a gravitational field around themselves that few can explain and fewer can resist. When everyone else is amplifying, the person who quietly reduces draws attention precisely through contrast. When the room is loud, the one who is quiet becomes the most interesting person in it. But understatement is more than a vocal technique. It is a comprehensive posture. It is the way you describe your achievements, briefly, without flourish, almost as afterthoughts. It is the way you receive praise, without denial, but without feeding on it either. It is the way you present your plans, as modest intentions rather than grand visions, which makes their eventual execution all the more striking. The practitioner of understatement never tells you that what they are doing is significant. They let you discover the significance yourself. And what people discover for themselves, they believe far more deeply than what they are told. This is how you build a reputation that outlasts any single interaction, not by announcing who you are, but by allowing who you are to be gradually, undeniably revealed, always slightly later than the observer expects, always slightly more than the observer anticipated. The fifth trait, emotional impermeability. Here is the most dangerous of all 5 qualities, and the one that is most consistently misunderstood. Emotional impermeability is not the absence of emotion. It is the discipline of not allowing your emotional interior to become visible to those who would use it against you. Every emotion you display in a contested environment is information. Your frustration reveals that someone has found a pressure point. Your excitement reveals what you want. Your fear reveals what you are protecting. Your happiness reveals what matters to you. In an environment populated by people who are, consciously or unconsciously, mapping your responses for their own advantage, every emotional display is a gift you are handing to your opponents. The strategically intelligent person learns to maintain what I will call a composed surface. Not a blank one. Blankness is as readable as expressiveness, and often more alarming. A composed surface. Calm, present, attentive, and utterly unreadable beneath its apparent openness. This does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean severing your connections to your emotional life. It means constructing a controlled interface between your interior experience and the world that observes you. Machiavelli understood this as the cornerstone of political survival. The prince who reacted to provocation visibly gave his adversaries a map. The prince who received everything with the same composed gravity forced his adversaries to navigate blind, and people navigating blind make mistakes. Expensive ones. Now let's ground these 5 traits in the 3 environments where you are navigating right now. In the professional environment, you are in a meeting. Someone takes credit for your idea. The reactive response, correction, visible frustration, the assertion of your contribution, tells everyone watching that you can be rattled. It puts you on the defensive, in a space where defense is weakness. The strategic diminishment response, you say nothing in the moment. You observe who noticed, who didn't, who defended you internally but said nothing. You identify the architecture of loyalty and opportunism in the room. You file everything, and at the precise moment that serves your interest, not theirs, yours, you make your contribution undeniable through an action, not an argument. You don't win the argument in the meeting, you make the meeting irrelevant. In personal relationships, there is someone in your life who measures their own value by keeping you slightly smaller than them. This is a common dynamic. They offer backhanded praise. They minimize your achievements. They position themselves as the more experienced, more capable, more together version of the two of you. The reactive person argues, defends, asserts their worth. And in doing so, they confirm to the other person that their strategy is producing results because you are responding to it. The strategic person does none of this. They absorb the diminishment without visible reaction. They offer nothing that can be used as fuel. And quietly, with the patience of someone who has decided they are not playing this game, they redirect their energy toward people and environments where they are not required to constantly prove their worth. They leave, not dramatically, not in anger. They simply become less present. And the person who depended on diminishing them suddenly finds that the contrast they were using to elevate themselves has quietly disappeared. in social interactions, new environments, new people. The instinct of most intelligent people in unfamiliar social terrain is to establish credibility early, to find ways to signal that they belong, that they are capable, that they deserve to be taken seriously. This is the amateur move. The practitioner of strategic diminishment enters new environments as a listener, as an observer, as someone who appears to have nothing particularly urgent to prove. They ask questions that reveal curiosity rather than expertise. They respond to others with genuine attention rather than strategic self-insertion. And by the time everyone else in the room has revealed their full hand, their anxieties, their ambitions, their alliances, their insecurities, the strategist has revealed almost nothing. They have, however, acquired everything they need to know to navigate that environment with precision. The most powerful person in the room is rarely the one who spoke most. They are almost always the one who listened best. But the coldest play is still coming, because everything I have described so far, the silence, the patience, the emotional impermeability, these are foundations, necessary ones. But the full architecture of strategic diminishment has one more level, a level that transforms these individual traits into a coherent, devastating strategy. And it requires you to understand something about timing that most people will spend their entire lives getting wrong. Stay with me. Because what comes next is where the philosophy becomes a weapon. At this point, something has changed in the way you are reading the world around you. You are not the same person who pressed play on this video. You may not feel different yet. Transformation rarely arrives as sensation first. It arrives as clarity, as the quiet, irreversible shift of a lens that once placed will never quite sit the way it did before. What I am about to give you now is not theory. It is the specific, implementable, immediately applicable mechanics of strategic diminishment, the exact moves, the precise language, the calibrated responses to the situations you will face, in some cases tomorrow morning. Pay attention with your full intelligence, because this is where the map becomes territory. And understand something before we begin. Tactics without character are tricks. Tricks get discovered. What I'm about to describe to you is not a series of tricks. It is a coherent system, a way of moving through the world that, once internalized, becomes indistinguishable from who you are. The goal is not to perform these responses. It is to practice them until they are no longer performances, until they are simply how you operate. That takes time, it takes deliberate repetition, and it starts here. Tactic 1. The controlled reveal. Most people reveal their capabilities gradually and passively, as situations arise that demand them. This is called reactive disclosure. It is inefficient and strategically wasteful. You spend your best cards in moments that were not chosen. You produce your most impressive work in contexts that cannot amplify it. You demonstrate your depth to audiences that are not positioned to reward it. The practitioner of strategic diminishment operates on an entirely different model. They control the timing, the context, and the magnitude of every single revelation of their capability. Before any significant disclosure, they have already asked themselves, what do I reveal here? What do I withhold? What effect does this produce? And is this the right moment to produce it? This is called the controlled reveal, and it is the difference between a life spent being vaguely appreciated and a life spent being precisely understood, on your terms, at your timing, to maximum effect. Here is how it works in practice. Full scenario. You arrive at a new organization, a new team, a new environment. Everything in the culture around you is pulling you toward rapid credentialing, toward demonstrating your value as quickly as possible so that others will know where you stand and treat you accordingly. Your nervous system, trained by years of meritocratic performance culture, is urging you to show what you know, to establish yourself, to plant your flag. Resist it, completely. Not partially, completely. In the first phase of your presence in any new environment, your only job is to observe, to listen with the specific attention of someone who knows that everything being said is also showing them something that is not being said. To ask questions that appear naive and produce sophisticated intelligence, to be present without being loud, to contribute without dominating. During this phase, you are building a model of the environment in your mind, one that is invisible to everyone around you. You are mapping the real power structures, which are almost never the same as the official ones. You are identifying who the actual decision makers are versus who believes they are. You are learning which problems are considered unsolvable, and more importantly, why they are considered unsolvable, because the reason is almost always not the stated one. You are also, critically, building an image, and the image you are building, deliberately, carefully, is one of someone who is engaged, reliable, pleasant, and capable at a level of perhaps 60 or 70% of your actual ability. You are competent. You are not remarkable. You do not make people around you feel inadequate by comparison. You do not trigger the defensive recalculations that genuine displayed superiority always triggers. You are invisible in the precise way that a patient hunter is invisible. And then, at the moment you have identified in the context you have prepared, you produce the result, not loudly, not with announcement, not with the energy of someone who has been waiting to finally show what they are worth. You simply produce it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if it required no special effort, as if anyone paying reasonable attention would have arrived at the same place. The effect is disproportionate to the action, because the action is measured against the image you have constructed. If you had been operating at full visible capability from the beginning, this result would be expected. Perhaps unremarkable, perhaps even resented as arrogant, certainly not the subject of the particular quality of attention and recalibration that now occurs. But because the image that precedes it is one of careful, pleasant modesty, the result appears, to everyone watching, not just impressive, but extraordinary. And extraordinary results produced by someone who didn't appear to be reaching for them create a very specific kind of social gravity, not the aggressive, high-maintenance authority of someone who is constantly performing power, the quiet, durable gravity of someone who cannot be fully understood and therefore cannot be fully anticipated. And people who cannot fully anticipate you cannot fully compete with you. They cannot position themselves against you because they don't know where you are. They cannot diffuse your influence because they don't know the source of it. They feel it, but they cannot name it, and what cannot be named cannot be strategically countered. The phrases that surround this tactic, when someone asks you about your capabilities before you have chosen to reveal them, you say, "I'm still learning this space, but I find it genuinely fascinating." Not, "I'm an expert," even if you are one of the most qualified people in the room. The expert who announces expertise creates an immediate burden of proof. Every subsequent action is measured against the claimed height, but the attentive learner who expresses genuine curiosity creates an invitation and investment. People love explaining things to someone who appears to be genuinely absorbing them, and while they are explaining, they are revealing. When you produce a result that surprises the room, you do not accept the praise by confirming the impression of exceptional talent. You say, "I just approached it from a slightly different angle than usual. I think the timing helped." Not because you believe this, you don't, but because this response does two critical things simultaneously. First, it disarms envy by declining to own the superiority the result implies. Second, it deepens the mystery. People who watch someone produce something genuinely exceptional and then quietly understate it begin to wonder, consciously or not, what else might exist beneath the surface they have been shown. That wondering is your power. That wondering is the precise mechanism by which influence, real influence, is constructed. Tactic 2. The strategic question. There is a kind of question that displays knowledge rather than seeking it. You see this constantly from people who have mistaken performance for communication. They ask questions that are really compressed lectures, statements in disguise, loaded with embedded assumptions, peppered with vocabulary that announces the sophistication of the questioner before the question itself has even landed. These questions do something specific. They make the questioner visible. And visibility, as we have established throughout this video, is frequently a liability in contested environments. There is another kind of question, the strategic question, simple on its surface, apparently guileless in its register, but targeted with the precision of a scalpel aimed at exactly the information you need, designed to extract it, while revealing nothing about why you want it or what you already know. The strategic question creates a specific dynamic. The person being asked feels seen, valued, and respected, because you are directing your genuine attention toward their experience and knowledge. In exchange for that feeling, they give you exactly the intelligence you were seeking, often more than they intended. This is the economy of conversational power. You invest attention, you receive information. They invest information, they receive the sensation of being heard. The exchange appears symmetrical. It is not. Here is the contrast in practice. The reactive, ego-driven approach. I've actually been analyzing this problem through a behavioral economics framework. I think the loss aversion component is significantly underweighted in the current approach. Have you stress-tested the model against that variable? This question announces your framework, your sophistication, your reading history, and your implicit criticism of the existing approach, all before anyone has decided to give you the floor. It triggers defensiveness in the people whose work you are implicitly critiquing. It signals ambition in a way that activates competitive responses, and it reveals with unnecessary generosity the direction of your thinking. The strategic question version. What have been the most persistent obstacles you've run into with how this has been approached so far? The second question produces the same information, probably more, because the person speaking will fill in the gaps you appear not to know. While giving away almost nothing about your existing analysis, you learn. They feel heard and respected. You remain opaque. The entire exchange serves your objectives without a single piece of your strategy leaving your hands. Let me give you the full vocabulary of the strategic question. These are phrases you can begin using immediately, in meetings, in negotiations, in social environments, in any context where information is the actual currency. What's your read on this? Invites full disclosure while revealing nothing about yours. How did you arrive at that? Extracts reasoning, exposes assumptions, reveals process without triggering defensiveness. What would change your thinking on this? Identifies their flexibility, their constraints, their non-negotiables, maps the territory of persuasion before you attempt to navigate it. What's the part of this that still feels unresolved to you? Targets the precise anxiety or uncertainty that is driving behavior. The answer to this question tells you more about what matters to someone than any amount of direct interrogation. What do people usually miss when they first encounter this? This is perhaps the most elegant of all. It positions the person as an expert relative to you, invites full disclosure of what they consider the most important nuances, and produces the intelligence most likely to be actionable, all while creating genuine goodwill. Practice these until they become automatic. Practice them until asking them doesn't feel like a technique, but simply like the way you engage, because eventually, that is exactly what it will be. Tactic 3. Absorbing without reacting. This is the one most people fail, because this is the one that requires the most sustained self-discipline in real time, not in calm reflection, not in the comfort of preparation, but in the heated, compressed, socially charged moments specifically designed by your environment to destabilize you and produce a reaction that can be read, catalogued, and used. Someone dismisses your contribution in a meeting. Someone takes credit for work that originated with you. Someone speaks over you, past you, or about you in terms that are condescending. Someone challenges you publicly in a way that appears designed not to advance the conversation, but to diminish you before an audience. These moments are tests, not of your intelligence. Your intelligence is not in question. Not of your capability. Your capability is not in question. They are tests of your composure, and composure under pressure, maintained without performance, without visible effort, without the subtle tells of someone who is working hard to appear calm when they are not. This is, without question, the single most reliable and universally legible signal of genuine inner strength that exists in human social life. People read it immediately. They may not be able to name what they are reading, but they feel it. And what they feel, at the most instinctive level, is that you are not available to be rattled, that you have interior ground beneath your feet that does not shift when they push, that you are, in some fundamental way, operating from a position they cannot access by destabilizing your surface. That feeling is authority. unannounced, unperformed, undeniable authority. Here is the precise response architecture for each of the most common destabilization scenarios. Scenario 1. The public dismissal. Setting. You are in a meeting. You offer a contribution, an analysis, a suggestion, an observation. Someone senior or competitive responds in a way that minimizes it. Perhaps they redirect immediately without acknowledgement. Perhaps they offer a brief, dismissive "we've looked at that" that forecloses further discussion. Perhaps they simply don't respond at all, and the conversation moves on as if you hadn't spoken. Every instinct you have been trained to act on says, assert yourself, clarify, provide more evidence, make them acknowledge what you said. Every one of those instincts is wrong. Here is why. The moment you push for acknowledgement, you signal that the dismissal landed. You have confirmed to everyone watching that the move worked, that it reached you, disrupted you, produced the need for defensive response, and in social environments, a move that works will be repeated. The strategic diminishment response: receive the dismissal with complete surface neutrality. A brief nod or nothing. A slight pause. Not an angry pause. A considered one. And then a calm shift of attention to whatever comes next in the conversation. You have neither accepted the dismissal nor contested it. You have filed it, internally, without visible reaction, and the room, particularly the people who were watching to see how you would respond, has just witnessed something that is genuinely difficult to interpret. They expected reaction. They received stillness. Stillness in a moment designed to produce movement is the most unsettling response available to you. It raises a specific and uncomfortable question in the mind of the observer. What does this person know that I don't? Why aren't they bothered? What am I missing? If you choose to speak at all in this moment, the specific phrase is interesting. Just that. One word. Delivered without irony, without visible heat, without any audible investment in its reception. It acknowledges that something was said. It reveals nothing about your assessment of what was said. And it has the particular quality of seeming to withhold a complete thought, which makes the listener want to know the rest, which means they are now leaning toward you rather than away from you. The dismissal has produced the opposite of its intended effect, not because you argued, because you didn't. Scenario 2. Credit taken for your work. This is one of the most common and most corrosive dynamics in professional environments. Someone presents your idea as their own, sometimes blatantly, sometimes with a subtlety that makes it difficult to call out without appearing petty or paranoid. The room receives the idea, the credit attaches to them, and you sit with the quiet, burning awareness of having been robbed. The reactive response, actually, I raised that in our meeting last Thursday, or any version of direct correction, produces a specific social dynamic. It positions you as the defender of your own credit, which is a position of weakness, regardless of whether your claim is accurate. It disrupts the room. It creates an awkward atmosphere that people will remember and unconsciously associate with you. And it confirms to the person who took your credit that they found a pressure point. The strategic diminishment response operates on a completely different axis. You do not contest the attribution in the moment. What you do instead is make your authorship undeniable through your next contribution. You offer the follow-up insight, the logical next question, the complicating nuance, the application nobody has thought of yet, that could only come from someone who generated the original idea, not someone who heard it and repeated it. You do this calmly, in a tone that assumes everyone already understands your relationship to the material, because the person who claimed your idea can repeat it. They cannot replicate the depth behind it. And the moment you demonstrate that depth, anyone in the room who was paying attention understands exactly what happened, without you having to say a single accusatory word. The specific language. Building on that, one of the things I was working through in the original framing was, notice what this phrase does. It does not say, my idea. It does not challenge. It does not accuse, but it uses the word original, casually, as if it requires no defense, and it presents knowledge that demonstrates intimate familiarity with the concept's genesis. Everyone who is listening hears this clearly. The person who took the credit hears it most clearly of all, and the message has been delivered with perfect, plausible deniability. You have reclaimed your territory without a confrontation. You have demonstrated your depth without a declaration, and you have done it in a way that makes you appear generous and focused on the work, not the credit, which is paradoxically the most effective way of ensuring you receive the credit. Scenario 3. Being spoken over or past. You are speaking. Someone interrupts, fully, cleanly, without apology, redirecting the conversation as if your words were not in the air. The reactive response is to continue speaking, to raise your voice, to compete for the floor. This produces a specific outcome, a brief, undignified contest that no one looks good leaving. The strategic diminishment response: stop speaking immediately, not from defeat, from decision. The quality of the stopping matters. It is not a flinch, it is a choice. And the distinction, while entirely internal, radiates outward in ways that experienced observers can feel. You stop. You wait. You give the interruption its full space. And then when the interruption has completed, rather than rushing back to what you were saying, as if afraid of losing your turn, afraid that the moment is closing, afraid that you will not be heard, you take one beat, one deliberate, unhurried breath, and then you say, "I'll let you finish. Mine can wait." Analyze this phrase carefully, because it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it is generous. It yields the floor. It expresses patience. It appears cooperative. But beneath the surface, it does something far more powerful. It signals to everyone in the room that you were not competing for the floor, that you do not operate on the anxious, reactive timeline that the interruption was implicitly assuming you did, that you have confidence in the return of your moment, not because you are demanding it, but because you know it will come. And the person who interrupted you, who expected either resistance or defeat, is instead presented with a response that frames your patience as superiority, which is exactly what it is. When the conversation eventually returns to you, and it will because you have made it socially obligatory that it does, you do not resume as if reclaiming something that was taken. You resume as if simply continuing something that was briefly paused. Same composure, same measured pace, same complete absence of urgency. The floor was never taken from you, because you were never fighting for it. Scenario 4. The public challenge. This is the most sophisticated of the destabilization scenarios and the one that requires the most precise response. Because the public challenge is a specific kind of social move, it is designed not primarily to be answered, but to produce a specific quality of reaction from you in front of witnesses. The ideal outcome for the challenger is to see you become defensive, flustered, aggressive, or visibly uncertain. Any of these outcomes confirms their implicit narrative that you are not as capable, confident, or authoritative as you project. Any of these outcomes gives the audience something to remember that serves the challenger's agenda. The reactive response, whether you argue brilliantly, defend your position compellingly, or demolish the challenge with superior evidence, still in some measure serves the challenger's purpose, because you are engaging on their terms, in the frame they set, on the timeline they chose. Even a response that wins the argument confirms that the challenge was worth making. The strategic diminishment response completely decouples from that frame. It does not accept the premise that a challenge has occurred. It receives the challenge as a genuine inquiry and responds with the single most disarming phrase available to you in this scenario. What would convince you? Read that again. Sit with what it does. It does not concede the challenge. It does not validate the premise. It does not mount a defense. It redirects the entire energy of the exchange, from your defense to their criteria. Suddenly you are not the one being examined. They are. Suddenly the question is not whether you are right. The question is whether they even know what evidence would satisfy them. And most people, when genuinely asked what would convince them in real time, in front of an audience, with the full weight of the question on their shoulders, discover that they do not have a clean answer. They discover that their challenge was driven by something other than logical criteria, by competitive instinct, by social maneuvering, by a desire to demonstrate their own status at your expense. And that discovery, made publicly, is far more damaging to them than anything you could have said in your own defense. You have turned the arrow around without touching it. Tactic 4. Managing your information ecology. Most people give information away constantly without realizing it. Not through deliberate disclosure, but through the accumulation of small, casual, apparently insignificant revelations, in hallway conversations, in offhand remarks, in the things they choose to say when they are relaxed and not thinking about the strategic implications of their words. These small disclosures build an extraordinarily detailed picture of who you are, what you want, what you fear, what you value, what annoys you, what excites you, what you are proud of and what you are ashamed of. And that picture, in the hands of someone who knows how to use it, is a precise and comprehensive map of exactly how to manage, influence, and, if necessary, compromise you. The practice of managing your information ecology is simple to describe and demanding to execute. It begins with the recognition that every conversation is a transaction, not in the cynical sense that genuine human connection is impossible, but in the realistic sense that information moves in all interactions, and the direction and content of that movement have consequences. From that recognition comes a practice. Before you speak anything that is not purely operational or social, you ask yourself, not consciously, not with visible hesitation, but with the automatic internal check of someone who has built the habit, does giving this information serve me, or does it serve the person who receives it? This is not paranoia. Paranoia is the indiscriminate suspicion of all information exchange. What I am describing is discernment, the deliberate curation of what you share, with whom, in what context, and to what end. In practice, this means several specific behavioral adjustments. You stop volunteering information about your next moves. When people ask what you are working on, what your plans are, where you see yourself in a year, you offer responses that are honest, but incomplete. You give the outline without the architecture. I'm focused on a few things that are taking most of my attention right now is not a lie. It is a calibrated truth. You stop expressing frustration about specific people or dynamics in your environment, except to those whose discretion you have verified through extended observation, not through their assurances, through their track record. Every frustration you express is intelligence that can be used against you or used to manage you. You stop revealing your timelines. When you intend to act, when you need something to happen by, when you are running out of patience with a situation, these are pieces of information that, in the hands of someone who is competing with you, are precise tactical advantages. A person who knows your deadline can wait you out. A person who knows your urgency can raise their price. And you become extremely attentive to what you communicate non-verbally through your physical responses to information, your micro-expressions, the speed at which you respond to certain messages, the topics that animate you versus the ones that leave you flat. These are all readable, all of them, by anyone who is paying attention, and some of the people around you are paying more attention than you are currently giving them credit for. Tactic 5. The architecture of deliberate presence. There is a quality that the most strategically sophisticated people possess that is perhaps the hardest to describe and the most unmistakable to experience. It is the quality of being fully, specifically, deliberately present in an interaction, not because you have nothing else to think about, but because you have decided that this interaction deserves your complete attention. This sounds simple. It is extraordinarily rare. Most people are partially present in most conversations. They are thinking about what they are going to say next, or about an unrelated problem, or about how they are being perceived, or about what they need from this interaction. Their attention is fractured, and the fracture is legible. You feel it when someone is not quite with you. There is a slight delay, a slight vacancy, a sense that you are talking to the surface of a person rather than to the person themselves. Now think about how it feels when someone gives you their complete attention. Not performed attention, not nodding and eye contact and affirmations. Actual attention, the kind that makes you feel as though for this moment nothing else exists for them Accept what you are saying. It is disarmingly powerful. People open to it. People trust it. People remember it. And they remember, with a vividness that casual interactions rarely produce, the person who gave it to them. The practitioner of strategic diminishment uses this deliberately. In interactions that matter, conversations with people whose trust, cooperation, or information is strategically valuable, they deploy complete, undivided, unhurried attention as a resource. They do not look at their phone. They do not allow their eyes to drift. They do not rush toward their response. They listen until the other person has finished, fully finished, not just paused. And then they respond in a way that demonstrates, specifically and unmistakably, that they heard not just the words but the meaning beneath the words. What I hear you saying is not just X, but that you're also concerned about Y. Is that right? This phrase, offered with genuine attention and without agenda, produces a specific reaction in the person receiving it, a feeling of being profoundly understood. And a feeling of being profoundly understood creates trust at a speed that no amount of impressed performance can match. You are not trying to impress them. You are trying to understand them. And the person who makes you feel genuinely understood occupies a position in your emotional architecture that no one else can easily displace. This is influence at its most elegant, not the influence of authority or status or display. The influence of authentic strategic attention, which is to say, the rarest and most powerful kind. The errors. What the undisciplined do that destroys everything. Let me be direct about this, because there are specific patterns of behavior that people adopt in the name of strategy that are not strategy at all. They are disguised reactions. They are the ego refusing to step aside and allow the strategy to work. And they will cost you everything you have been building, often at the worst possible moment. The first error, false modesty that seeks correction. There is a version of appearing weak that is not strategic diminishment. It is performed inadequacy, designed to fish for reassurance. The person who consistently downplays their capabilities while waiting, barely concealing their need for someone to insist that they are actually exceptional. This is not strategy. This is insecurity wearing strategy's clothes, and it is immediately visible to anyone who is paying attention, because the underlying hunger for reassurance leaks through the performance of modesty in ways that are difficult to fully conceal. The practitioner of genuine strategic diminishment does not perform modesty because they need someone to correct it. They perform limitation because they have calculated that the appearance of limitation serves a specific objective. The difference is in the internal orientation. One is seeking something from others. The other is producing a desired effect on others. These are completely different postures, and they produce completely different results. If you find yourself feeling disappointed when no one argues with your self-deprecation, stop. You are not practicing strategic diminishment. You are practicing emotional dependency with a sophisticated veneer. Rebuild the foundation before continuing. The second error, breaking under extended underestimation. This is the most common failure in long-term strategic positioning. You have been patient. You have maintained your image. You have absorbed dismissals and redirected provocations and maintained composure in moment after moment that was designed to break it. And then something crosses a threshold, an underestimation that feels like too much, a dismissal that feels genuinely unfair, an environment that seems completely blind to what you are, and the accumulated pressure of all that sustained patience finds a crack, and you react. You assert, you correct, you finally, explicitly demonstrate what you've been concealing. Not at a moment of your choosing, not in a context calibrated for maximum effect, at the moment when you could no longer hold it. And in that moment, you reveal not just your capability, but your trigger. You have shown the specific point at which the strategy breaks. You have handed that information to everyone present. And in the hands of someone who is actually operating strategically, your trigger is worth more than anything you gained by the assertion. The error is not in feeling the accumulated frustration. The error is in allowing that frustration to determine your timing rather than your strategy. Machiavelli watched princes fall this way. Men of genuine capability and genuine patience who held their position through long, difficult, undervalued stretches. and then, in a single reactive moment, sacrificed everything the patients had built. He described this pattern with a particular kind of sadness because the waste of it was so specific. Not the failure of capability, but the failure of endurance in the final stretch before the moment would have arrived. If you cannot sustain the practice through extended underestimation, the practice needs more work before it is deployed in high-stakes environments. This is not a judgment. It is a diagnostic. The foundation requires more building before the architecture can be trusted. The third error, performing weakness without substance. This is the error with the most serious long-term consequences, and the one that is most difficult to recover from when it is finally exposed. Strategic diminishment derives its entire power from the contrast between the apparent and the actual. The appearance of limitation draws its force from the reality of capability. Remove the reality, and you have only the appearance. And an appearance without substance is eventually, always, without exception, discovered. The person who performs limitation without possessing genuine depth will, at the moment of controlled reveal, produce nothing of significance, and the audience that has been primed to expect the extraordinary by the architecture of careful modesty will instead encounter ordinary. The effect is not neutral. It is worse than if no expectation had been built at all. The gap between the anticipated and the actual becomes precisely the measure of the con, and people who feel they have been conned do not forgive. This means that everything in this video, every tactic, every practice, every calibration of appearance, all of it is contingent on the existence of genuine depth, genuine preparation, genuine capability, genuine intelligence working, invisibly, underneath the managed surface. You must actually be what you are concealing. This is the non-negotiable prerequisite, not as a moral requirement, as a strategic one. The concealment is only valuable because of what it conceals. Build the substance first, then, and only then, begin to manage its visibility. The fourth error, using the tools of strategy in the service of fear. There is a corruption of strategic diminishment that looks like it on the surface, but is built on a completely different foundation. The person who hides their capabilities, not because they have calculated that concealment serves their objectives, but because they are afraid of being seen, afraid of failure, afraid that if they try and fail, the damage will be irreversible. This is not strategy. This is avoidance dressed in strategic language. And the distinction matters enormously, not just practically, but psychologically, because the person who mistakes their avoidance for strategy will never progress through the phases described in this video. They will remain permanently in the first phase, collecting intelligence they never use, waiting for a moment that their fear will never allow them to identify as having arrived. The practitioner of genuine strategic diminishment is not afraid of being seen. They have chosen deliberately for specific reasons and toward specific ends not to be seen yet. The word yet carries everything. It implies the existence of a plan, a timeline, a moment that is being prepared for. If your concealment has no yet, if there is no planned moment of controlled reveal toward which your patience is building, then you are not practicing strategic diminishment. You are practicing disappearance. And disappearance does not produce outcomes. It produces absence. Everything you have received in this block, the controlled reveal, the strategic question, the precise responses to each destabilization scenario, the management of your information ecology, the deployment of deliberate presence, these are not isolated techniques. They are interlocking components of a single, coherent approach to moving through the world. The person who practices all of them consistently, across the full range of their daily interactions, over a sustained period of time, this person does not just become more strategically effective. They become structurally and irreversibly a different kind of person. The practices do not remain external. They internalize. They become reflex. They become character. And when strategy becomes character, it is no longer visible as strategy. It is simply who you are. That transformation, that final, deepest transformation, is what the next section is about. Prepare yourself, because what comes next is the part of this video that will remain with you longest. We have come a long way together in this video, and I want you to do something before we arrive at the end. Not a technique, not a tactic, not a strategic reframing of a situation, something simpler and more demanding than any of those things. I want you to sit for a moment with the full weight of what you have received in the last hour. Not with excitement. Excitement is the wrong register for this. Excitement is a surface emotion, a rush, the kind of sensation that peaks and fades and leaves you looking for the next source. What I am asking for is something quieter and more durable, the specific stillness of someone who has just understood something that cannot be ununderstood, the particular quality of attention that comes after a real shift, not the noise of being impressed, but the silence of being changed, because that is what has happened here, whether or not you can feel it yet. Think about who you were when you pressed play on this video. You came here with something. Maybe it was frustration, the accumulated low-grade exhaustion of someone who has been intelligent in the wrong way, visibly, loudly, reactively, and has received not the returns that intelligence should produce, but the friction and resistance and quiet resentment that visible intelligence so reliably generates. Maybe you came here with confusion, the sense that the rules of the game you were playing did not quite match the outcomes you were receiving, that you were doing what you were supposed to do, demonstrating capability, expressing yourself, asserting your worth, and that the world was not responding the way the script you were handed said it would. Maybe you came here with suspicion, a long-held, never quite articulated sense that there was a layer beneath the surface of every interaction that you could sometimes sense but could never fully access. A layer where the real decisions were made, where the real assessments happened, where the real game was being played quietly, by people who had been taught its rules in ways you had not. You sensed the trap, you just didn't yet know how to name it. Now you do. The person who emerges from this understanding is not the person who entered it. Not because you have acquired new information. Information by itself changes nothing. The libraries of the world are full of people who have read everything and changed nothing, because they consumed the knowledge without allowing it to restructure the architecture of how they move. They read the map, and then continued walking in the same direction. What changes you is not knowing this, it is deciding to live it, and that decision, conscious, deliberate, made not in the heat of excitement, but in the cold clarity of genuine understanding, is the beginning of a transformation that goes far deeper than any single tactic or technique. Let me describe to you, with precision, what that transformation actually looks like, what specifically changes, what the world looks like from the other side of it. The first transformation, your relationship to approval. Before this shift, approval operated as a kind of oxygen in your social environment. You needed enough of it to function. The withdrawal of it created anxiety. The presence of it created relief. And the pursuit of it, often unconscious, often automatic, shaped a significant portion of your behavior in ways you were not fully aware of. This is not a character flaw. It is not weakness in the ordinary sense. It is the predictable result of growing up in a world that distributed its rewards, grades, praise, social inclusion, professional advancement, through explicit systems of approval. You learned rationally and correctly that approval had survival value, and that learning became architecture. But here is what happens when you internalize strategic diminishment fully, when you stop needing others to see your strength in order to feel that you have it. When your self-assessment becomes internal and stable, grounded in your observed, practiced, tested reality, rather than in the shifting opinions of people who do not have full access to what you are, something extraordinary occurs. The approval stops mattering, not in the way of forced detachment, not in the way of telling yourself it shouldn't matter and then monitoring your feelings to check if it's working, in the way of genuine structural change. The building is no longer resting its foundations in other people's opinions. The foundations have been moved. And a building whose foundations are in verified reality does not shake when the weather of someone's dismissal moves through it. You will still be aware of approval and disapproval. You will still receive them. But you will receive them the way a navigator receives wind reports, as information about the environment, not as judgments about the validity of your direction. This is, for many people, one of the most significant single shifts in their experience of daily life. The constant background hum of social monitoring, the low-level management of how you are being perceived at every moment, quiets. The energy that was consumed by that monitoring becomes available. And what you do with available energy is one of the most interesting questions you will ever answer about yourself. The second transformation, your relationship to time. The reactive person experiences time as a series of urgent presents. Each moment demands an immediate response. Each provocation requires an immediate resolution. Each opportunity must be seized now, before it closes. The emotional urgency of each situation determines the speed of the response. This makes them extraordinarily predictable. A map of their behavior can be constructed simply by cataloging what provokes them and observing what they do when provoked. They are, in a sense, a machine. Input the right stimulus and reliably receive the predetermined output. After this transformation, your relationship to time changes in a way that is difficult to describe, but immediately recognizable in practice. You begin to experience time not as a succession of urgent presents, but as a landscape, something that can be surveyed, understood, and moved through with intention rather than simply reacted to as it arrives. Patience becomes a source of power rather than a source of resentment. Before this transformation, waiting felt like losing, like being held back, like the world moving forward while you stood still. After it, waiting is an active stance, the posture of someone who knows that time is not neutral, that it has direction, that different moments have different weights, and that the practitioner who knows which moments deserve action and which deserve observation has an advantage that the reactive person will never fully understand. Every moment of apparent inaction is, for you, a moment of active preparation, of observation, of intelligence gathering, of positioning. The impatient competitor exhausts themselves reaching forward, outward, visibly, loudly, for outcomes they cannot time and therefore cannot fully control. You remain still. And when the moment you have been watching for arrives, you recognize it immediately, because you have been watching for it all along, and you move with a precision that appears, to those who have not been watching, to be either lucky or uncanny. It is neither. It is the product of deliberate, sustained, disciplined patience, which is to say it is the most reliable form of power available to a human being. The third transformation, the texture of your silence. There are two kinds of quiet people, the kind who are quiet because they have nothing to say, and the kind who are quiet because they have decided not to say it yet. These two qualities are completely different in their effect. The first kind of silence is absence, a vacuum that people step over and past without particular notice. The second kind of silence is presence, a contained, deliberate withholding that radiates the particular atmosphere of someone who is operating on a timeline and from a depth that you cannot fully access. After this transformation, your silence changes quality, not because you have practiced maintaining a strategic expression, but because the inner landscape from which the silence originates has changed. You are no longer quiet because you are uncertain what to offer. You are quiet because you are watching, and watching with the specific, unhurried attention of someone who knows that what they are watching will eventually tell them everything they need to know. People feel this. It is not subtle. Silence that comes from depth is as legible to the social nervous system as silence that comes from absence. It reads completely differently. One invites filling, the other invites respect. The practitioner who has completed this transformation finds that their presence in a room changes the room, not through what they do or say, but through the quality of attention they bring and the quality of what they withhold. They become, without effort or announcement, a gravitational center. People orient toward them. People want to know what they think. People are slightly unnerved by the gap between the ordinary surface and the sense of extraordinary depth that lies beneath it. This is what is called presence in the true sense. Not stage presence, not charisma in the conventional performative meaning. The presence of someone who is fully, densely, deliberately there, and who has decided from a position of genuine interiority exactly how much of that interiority the room deserves to see. The fourth transformation, composure as architecture. In the beginning of any practice, the practice is work. You maintain composure in difficult moments through deliberate effort. You feel the trigger. You recognize the impulse toward reaction. You consciously override it and substitute the calibrated response. This takes energy. It takes attention. And in the early stages, it is visible, at least to yourself, as effort. Over time, something changes. The practice begins to migrate from the level of deliberate choice to the level of structural habit. The override becomes faster. The gap between trigger and response becomes shorter. The energy required for maintenance decreases, and at some point, not as a dramatic moment but as a gradual realization, you notice that you are no longer managing your composure. You simply have it. This is the difference between someone who is working hard to appear calm and someone who is actually calm. And that difference is perceivable at the most instinctive social level. The person who is working hard to appear calm produces a specific and subtle quality of tension that attentive observers register as something slightly not quite right. The person who is genuinely calm produces no such tension. Their composure is not a surface that might crack. It is a structural quality that does not have a cracking point. After this transformation, your emotional interior does not flatten or disappear. The events of your life do not lose their ability to move you. You feel what happens. You feel it, perhaps, more precisely and more fully than you did before, because you are no longer spending your emotional energy on reactive displays. You have more of it available for genuine experience. But the mechanism by which feeling translates into visible behavior has been fundamentally reconstructed. Your interior life and your visible surface are no longer continuous. There is a governed space between them. Not a wall, not a suppression, but a deliberate architecture of translation that you have built and maintain and inhabit as naturally as you inhabit your own body. Machiavelli called this quality virtù. Not virtue in the moral sense, in the sense of excellence, of disciplined mastery, of the specific kind of human capability that is produced not by talent, but by sustained conscious development. The person who possesses virtù does not react, they respond. And the difference between reacting and responding is, in the context of every significant human dynamic, the difference between being an instrument of others' agendas and being the author of your own. The fifth transformation, the paradox of vulnerability. This is the one that surprises people most, and I want to arrive at it carefully because it contains the deepest truth in this entire video. After the full internalization of strategic diminishment, after the composure is structural, after the patience is genuine, after the silence has weight, after the approval has lost its oxygen function, something paradoxical becomes possible that was not possible before. You become capable of genuine vulnerability. Not the performed vulnerability of someone who shares their struggles to create connection, which is a form of strategic disclosure and not the same thing at all. Genuine vulnerability, the actual, unconstructed exposure of something real and uncertain and unresolved within you, offered to someone whose discretion and care you have assessed through sustained observation and found reliable. Before this transformation, genuine vulnerability was dangerous, because your interior stability rested on external foundations, on the opinions of others, on continuous evidence of your acceptability and value. Any exposure of weakness in that interior was a risk to the foundations themselves. The structure was not solid enough to afford the opening. After this transformation, the structure is solid. The foundations are internal. And a structure with internal foundations can afford openings, can create windows, even doors, without risk of collapse. Because the stability does not depend on the perception of impenetrability. This means that the practitioner of strategic diminishment, fully developed, is not cold, is not closed, is not armored against human connection. They are, in fact, capable of deeper and more genuine connection than most people, precisely because their connection is not driven by need. It is offered from fullness, not from hunger, from choice, not from necessity. And the person who connects with you from that position offers you something that the needy, approval-seeking reactive person fundamentally cannot: the experience of being chosen rather than simply being used. This is the final paradox of this entire philosophy. The person who learns to conceal their vulnerability becomes, ultimately, the person most capable of genuine exposure. Not because vulnerability has been eliminated, but because the fear of its consequences has been. The legacy of Machiavelli. Let me tell you something about this man that the people who fear his name do not want you to understand. Niccolò Machiavelli was not a cold man. He was not a manipulator in the ordinary sense. He was not the architect of cynicism or the advocate of cruelty that centuries of misreading have made him. He was a man who loved his city, who served it with dedication and genuine care for more than a decade, contributing to its defense, its diplomacy, its governance with the full force of his considerable intelligence. He was a man who, when the political winds turned and he was removed from his position, arrested, tortured, stripped of everything he had built, responded not with bitterness or with the pursuit of revenge, but with something far more extraordinary. He retreated to a farm outside Florence. He put on his working clothes during the day. He managed his small estate, talked to the locals, played cards in the evenings, and at night he changed into formal clothes, the dress of a statesman though he held no state, and he went into his study and he wrote. He wrote about what he had seen, about what he had learned, about the actual mechanics of power in actual human systems, not as they should work, not as idealists wished they worked, but as they actually worked, in the full specificity of observed reality. The prince, the discourses, the art of war, the Florentine histories. These are not the works of a man who had abandoned his ideals. They are the works of a man who had loved something enough to understand it completely, including the parts that were difficult to see clearly, including the parts that did not flatter those who preferred comfortable illusions to useful truths. Machiavelli believed that those who understood power clearly and completely were better equipped to use it well, to defend against its abuses, and to build something durable from it, than those who approached it through the lens of what they wished it were. His apparent defeat, the exile, the obscurity, the reduction from statesman to farmer, was the condition that produced his most enduring work. His apparent weakness was the crucible in which his most powerful contribution was forged. He lived the philosophy. He did not merely describe it. And the lesson his life carries, beneath and beyond everything in the prince, is this. The person who can function, think, and create at their highest level, even when the world has temporarily removed them from the positions it uses to measure worth, even when they are operating in apparent defeat, even when no one is watching and no one is rewarding, that person is genuinely free, not free from circumstances, free from the need for circumstances to be a certain way in order to be who they are, free from the tyranny of external validation, free from the prison that is built not by other people's power over you but by your own belief that their approval determines your reality. That freedom is what Machiavelli was pointing at, not cynicism, not manipulation. Freedom, the specific, hard-won, irreversible freedom of someone who has understood the game completely and decided to play it on their own terms. And now, I want to address you directly, the specific, particular you, sitting wherever you are, having stayed with this video through everything it has asked of you. You stayed. And staying, as I said at the beginning, is itself a form of power in a world designed for distraction. But you did not just stay out of passive inertia. You stayed because something in this video named something in you, because the recognition was specific enough to hold your attention, because the philosophy described in terms more precise than you had previously encountered, something you have always suspected about the way the world actually operates. That recognition is important, not because it means you are special. Many people sense the gap between the world's official rules and its actual ones, but because recognizing it and doing something about it are entirely different decisions. And the decision to do something about it, to stop operating on the rules you were handed, and start operating on the rules that actually govern outcomes, that decision is yours to make or not make. Nobody else can make it. No video, no philosophy, no amount of intellectual understanding can make it for you. The understanding is available. The tools have been given. The architecture has been described. The map is in your hands. The question, the only question that remains, is whether you will use it. Not everyone will, and I want to be honest with you about that. Some people will finish this video feeling the energy of the ideas, the particular charge that comes from encountering a framework that describes the world more accurately than the ones they have been using, and they will carry that energy for a day or two, perhaps a week, and then it will fade. They will return to their previous patterns, not because they are weak. Weakness has nothing to do with it, but because the gap between understanding something and changing how you live is one of the most demanding gaps in human experience. It requires not just the willingness to change, but the willingness to be uncomfortable during the change, to be uncertain during the change, to appear to others as if nothing has changed while everything is being rebuilt on the inside. Most people are not willing to sustain that. And that is, in a specific sense, why the philosophy remains available and effective for those who are. If everyone practiced it, it would lose its edge. The fact that most will not is part of the architecture of the advantage. But some of you, I want to speak directly to this, some of you are ready. Not because you are further along in some developmental sequence, but because the conditions of your life have produced a specific kind of readiness, the readiness of someone who is tired enough of the old pattern that the discomfort of the new one seems worth it. The readiness of someone who has tried the other approach long enough to have a very specific set of data about its returns. The readiness of someone who, when they felt the recognition in this video, felt it not in their excitement, but in their bones. If that is you, and you will know whether it is, then what I am asking is not commitment to a set of tactics. It is commitment to a process of becoming. A slow, non-linear, demanding process that will sometimes look like nothing from the outside and will, on the inside, require more sustained honesty about yourself than any of the tactics in this video. The tactics are the visible part. The process is everything else. Go now. Back into the world you actually inhabit. The specific, imperfect, complicated world of your actual relationships, your actual work, your actual social environments and ambitions and frustrations, and begin. Not with the grand gesture, not with the announcement of transformation, not with the performance of a new identity that you are still growing into. Begin with silence, where you would have spoken. Begin with a question, where you would have asserted. Begin with observation, where you would have demonstrated. Begin with patience, and the single hardest beginning, and the one that determines all the others. These are small moves. They will be invisible to almost everyone around you, but they are the first threads of an architecture that, built consistently over time, becomes something that cannot be dismantled, something that is no longer a practice, no longer a strategy, no longer a set of techniques you deploy, but simply who you are. The hunter does not announce its focus. The deep river does not announce its depth. The most formidable people in any room do not announce their formidability. They simply inhabit it, fully, quietly, permanently. That is the destination. And today, in this video, you have taken the first deliberate step toward it. Not because someone told you to, because you chose it. If this message resonated in you, if somewhere in the architecture of this video you felt that cold, particular clarity of something true being named, then leave a comment with these words: "My silence is my sharpest blade." This is not a comment in the ordinary sense, it is a declaration, a silent covenant between you and the philosophy you have just inherited, between you and every person watching this video who recognized in it the same thing you recognized. You do not owe the world your full capability on demand. You owe yourself the discipline to deploy it at the moment of your choosing. And this moment, right now, you have just made the first move. And if you choose to subscribe to this channel, understand what that means. You are not simply clicking a button. You are choosing to remain inside a space where the game is not hidden from you, where the philosophy is not softened or sweetened or made palatable for those who prefer the comfort of simpler stories. You are joining a community of people who have decided, quietly, deliberately, without announcement, to understand the world as it actually is rather than as they were told it was. This is not a community of the loud. It is not a community of the aggressive or the cynical or the bitter. It is a community of the precise, of the patient, of the people who have understood that the most powerful thing you can do in a world that rewards display is to become, with absolute discipline, someone who does not need to display. The fortress is built not from noise but from depth, and you belong here, not because I am telling you that you do, but because something in you already knew it before I said it. Let your silence carry the weight of what you know. Let your patience be the measure of how serious you are. Let your apparent smallness be the protected space inside which your actual power grows, unseen, uncontested, unchallenged, until the precise moment when concealment is no longer required. And on that day, you will not need to announce what you have become. The evidence will already be speaking, and it will be saying everything you chose for so long and with such discipline not to say yourself. That is the final lesson Machiavelli left for those willing to read him with their full intelligence, not just their eyes, not the ones who feared him, the ones who understood him. Now you are one of them.